Chapter 25. Piper. Piper had a new entry in her top 10 list of times Piper felt useless. Fighting Shrimpzilla with a dagger in a pretty voice, not so effective. Then the monster had sunk into the deep and disappeared along with 3 of her friends, and she'd been powerless to help them. Afterwards, Annabeth, Coach Hedge and Buford the Table rushed around repairing things so that the ship wouldn't sink. Percy, despite being exhausted, searched the ocean for their missing friends. Jason, also exhausted, flew around the rigging like a blonde Peter Pan, putting out fires from the second green explosion that had lit up the sky just above the main mast. As for Piper, all she could do was stare at her knife, Catoptris, trying to locate Leo, Hazel and Frank. The only images that came to her were ones that she didn't want to see. 3 black SUVs driving north from Charleston, packed with Roman demigods. Rayna sitting at the wheel of the lead car. Giant eagles escorted them from above. Every so often, glowing purple spirits in ghostly chariots appeared out of the countryside and fell in behind them, thundering up I-95 towards New York and Camp Half-Blood. Piper concentrated harder. She saw the nightmarish images she had seen before. The human-headed bull rising from the water, then the dark, well-shaped room filling with black water as Jason, Percy and she struggled to stay afloat. She sheathed Catoptris, wondering how Helen of Troy had stayed sane during the Trojan War if this blade had been her only source of news. Then she remembered that everyone around Helen had been slaughtered by the invading Greek army. Maybe she hadn't stayed sane. By the time the sun rose, none of them had slept. Percy had scoured the sea floor and found nothing. The Argo II was no longer in danger of sinking, though without Leo, they couldn't do full repairs. The ship was capable of sailing, but no one suggested leaving the area, not without their missing friends. Piper and Annabeth sent a dream vision to Camp Half-Blood, warning Chiron of what had happened with the Romans of Fort Sumter. Annabeth explained her exchange of words with Rayna. Piper replayed the vision from her knife about the SUVs racing north. The kindly centaur's face seemed to age 30 years during the course of their conversation, but he assured them he would see to the defences of the camp. Tyson, Mrs. O'Leary and Ella had arrived safely. If necessary, Tyson could summon an army of Cyclopses to the camp's defence, and Ella and Rachel Dare were already comparing prophecies, trying to learn more about what the future held. The job of the 7 demigods aboard the Argo II, Chiron reminded them, was to finish the quest and come back safely. After the Iris message, the demigods paced the deck in silence, staring at the water and hoping for a miracle. When it finally came, 3 giant pink bubbles bursting at the surface off the starboard bow and ejecting Frank, Hazel and Leo, Piper went a little crazy. She cried out with relief and dived straight into the water. What was she thinking? She didn't take a rope or a life vest or anything. But at the moment she was just so happy that she paddled over to Leo and kissed him on the cheek, which kind of surprised him. "Miss me?" Leo laughed. Piper was suddenly furious. "Where were you? How are you guys alive?" "Long story," he said. A picnic basket bobbed to the surface next to him. "Want a brownie?" Once they had got on board and changed into dry clothes, poor Frank had to borrow a pair of 2 small jeans from Jason. The crew all gathered on the quarterdeck for a celebratory breakfast, except for Coach Hedge, who grumbled that the atmosphere was getting too cuddly for his tastes and went below to hammer out some dents in the hull. While Leo fussed over his helm controls, Hazel and Frank related the story of the fish centaurs and their training camp. "Incredible," Jason said. "These are really good brownies." "That's your only comment?" Piper demanded. He looked surprised. "What? I heard the story. Fish centaurs, merpeople, letter of intro into the Tiber River god. Got it, but these brownies." "I know," Frank said, his mouth full. "Try them with Esther's peach preserves." "That," Hazel said, "is incredibly disgusting." "Pass me the jar, man," Jason said. Hazel and Piper exchanged a look of total exasperation. Boys. Percy, for his part, wanted to hear every detail about the aquatic camp. He kept coming back to one point. "They didn't want to meet me?" "It wasn't that," Hazel said. "It just undersea politics, I guess. The merpeople are territorial. The good news is they're taking care of that aquarium in Atlanta, and they'll help protect the Argo II as we cross the Atlantic." Percy nodded absently. "But they didn't want to meet me." Annabeth swatted his arm. "Come on, seaweed brain. We've got other things to worry about." "She's right," Hazel said. "After today, Nico has less than 2 days. The fish centaurs said we have to rescue him. He's essential to the quest somehow." She looked around defensively, as if waiting for someone to argue. No one did. Piper tried to imagine what Nico D'Angelo was feeling, stuck in a jar with only 2 pomegranate seeds left to sustain him and no idea whether he would be rescued. It made Piper anxious to reach Rome, even though she had a horrible feeling she was sailing towards her own sort of prison, a dark room filled with water. Nico must have information about the doors of death, Piper said. We'll save him, Hazel. We can make it in time. Right, Leo? What? Leo tore his eyes away from the controls. Oh, yeah. We should reach the Mediterranean tomorrow morning, then spend the rest of that day sailing to Rome, or flying if I can get the stabilizer fixed by then. Jason suddenly looked as though his brownie with peach preserves didn't taste so good. Which will put us in Rome on the last possible day for Nico. 24 hours to find him, at most. Percy crossed his legs. And that's only part of the problem. There's the mark of Athena, too. Annabeth didn't seem happy with the change of topic. She rested her hand on her backpack, which, since she'd left Charleston, she always seemed to have with her. She opened the bag and brought out a thin bronze disc, the diameter of a donut. This is the map that I found at Fort Sumter. It's... She stopped abruptly, staring at the smooth bronze surface. It's blank. Percy took it and examined both sides. It wasn't like this earlier? No, I was looking at it in my cabin and... Annabeth muttered under her breath. It must be like the mark of Athena. I can only see it when I'm alone. It won't show itself to other demigods. Frank scooted back, like the disc might explode. He had an orange juice moustache and a brownie crumb beard that made Piper want to hand him a napkin. What did it have on it? Frank asked nervously. And what is the mark of Athena? I still don't get it. Annabeth took the disc from Percy. She turned it in the sunlight, but it remained blank. The map was hard to read, but it showed a spot on the Tiber River on Rome. I think that's where my quest starts. The path I've got to take to follow the mark. Maybe that's where you meet the river god, Tiberinus, Piper said. But what is the mark? The coin, Annabeth murmured. Percy frowned. What coin? Annabeth dug into her pocket and brought out a silver drachma. I've been carrying this ever since I saw my mum at Grand Central. It's an Athenian coin. She passed it around. While each demigod looked at it, Piper had a ridiculous memory of show and tell in elementary school. An owl, Leo noted. Well, that makes sense. I guess the branch is an olive branch? But what's this inscription? AOE. Area of effect? It's Alpha, Theta, Epsilon, Annabeth said. In Greek it stands for of the Athenians. And you could read it as the children of Athena. It's sort of the Athenian motto? Like SPQR for the Romans, Piper guessed. Annabeth nodded. Anyway, the mark of Athena is an owl, just like that one. It appears in fiery red. I've seen it in my dreams, then twice at Fort Sumter. She described what had happened at the fort. The voice of Gaia, the spiders in the garrison, the mark burning them away. Piper could tell it wasn't easy for her to talk about. Percy took Annabeth's hand. I should have been there for you. But that's the point, Annabeth said. No one can be there for me. When I get to Rome, I'll have to strike out on my own. Otherwise the mark won't appear. I'll have to follow it to the source. Frank took the coin from Leo. He stared at the owl. Giant's bane stands gold and pale, one with pain from a woven jail. He looked up at Annabeth. What is it, this thing at the source? Before Annabeth could answer, Jason spoke up. A statue, he said. A statue of Athena. At least, that's my guess. Piper frowned. You said you didn't know. I don't, but the more I think about it, there's only one artifact that could fit the legend. He turned to Annabeth. I'm sorry, I should have told you everything I've heard much earlier, but honestly, I was scared. If this legend is true... I know, Annabeth said. I figured it out, Jason. I don't blame you. But if we manage to save the statue, Greek and Romans together, don't you see? It could heal the rift. Hold on. Percy made a time-out gesture. What statue? Annabeth took back the silver coin and slipped it into her pocket. The Athena, Parthenos, she said. The most famous Greek statue of all time. It was 40 feet tall, covered in ivory and gold. It stood in the middle of the Parthenon in Athens. The ship went silent, except for the waves lapping against the hull. Okay, I'll bite, Leo said at last. What happened to it? It disappeared, Annabeth said. Leo frowned. How does a 40 feet tall statue in the middle of the Parthenon just disappear? That's a good question, Annabeth said. It's one of the biggest mysteries in history. Some people thought the statue was melted down for its gold or destroyed by invaders. Athens was sacked a number of times. Some thought the statue was carried off. By Romans, Jason finished. At least that's one theory, and it fits the legend I heard at Camp Jupiter. To break the Greek spirit, the Romans carted off the Athena Parthenos. When they took over the city of Athens, they hid it in an underground shrine in Rome. The Roman demigod swore it would never see the light of day. They literally stole Athena, so she could no longer be the symbol of Greek military power. She became Minerva, a much tamer goddess. And the children of Athena have been searching for the statue ever since, Annabeth said. Most don't know about the legend, but in each generation a few are chosen by the goddess. They're given a coin like mine. They follow the mark of Athena, a kind of magical trail that links them to the statue, hoping to find the resting place of the Athena Parthenos and get the statue back. Piper watched the two of them, Annabeth and Jason, with quiet amazement. They spoke like a team, without any hostility or blame. The two of them had never really trusted each other. Piper was also close enough to both of them to know that. But now, if they could discuss such a huge problem so calmly, the ultimate source of Greek-Roman hatred, maybe there was hope for the two camps after all. Percy seemed to be having similar thoughts, judging from his surprised expression. So if you, find the statue, what would we do with it? Could we even move it? I'm not sure, Annabeth admitted, but if we could save it somehow, it could unite the two camps. It could heal my mother of this hatred she's got, tearing her two aspects apart. And maybe the statue has some sort of power that could help us against the giants. Piper stared at Annabeth with awe, just starting to appreciate the huge responsibility her friend had taken on, and Annabeth meant to do it alone. This could change everything, Piper said. It could end thousands of years of hostility. It might be the key to defeating Gaia. But if we can't help you... She didn't finish, but the question seemed to hang in the air. Was saving the statue even possible? Annabeth squared her shoulders. Piper knew she must be terrified inside, but she did a good job of hiding it. I have to succeed, Annabeth said simply. The risk is worth it. Hazel twirled her hair pensively. I don't like the idea of you risking your life alone, but you're right. We saw what recovering the Golden Eagle standard did for the Roman legion. If this statue is the most powerful symbol of Athena ever created. It could kick some serious booty, Leo offered. Hazel frowned. That wasn't the way I'd put it, but yes. Except, Percy took Annabeth's hand again. No child of Athena has ever found it. Annabeth, what's down there? What's guarding it? If it's got to do with spiders. Won through pain from a woven jail, Frank recalled. Woven, like webs. Annabeth's face turned as white as printer paper. Piper suspected that Annabeth knew what awaited her, or at least that she had a very good idea. She was trying to hold down a wave of panic and terror. We'll deal with that when we get to Rome, Piper suggested, putting a little charm speak in her voice to soothe her friend's nerves. It's going to work out. Annabeth is going to kick some serious booty too. You'll see. Yeah, Percy said. I learned a long time ago, never bet against Annabeth. Annabeth looked at them both gratefully. Judging from their half-eaten breakfasts, the others still felt uneasy, but Leo managed to shake them out of it. He pushed a button, and a loud blast of steam exploded from Festus's mouth, making everyone jump. Well, he said, good pep rally, but there's still a ton of things to fix on this ship before we get to the Mediterranean. Please report to Supreme Commander Leo for your super fun list of chores. Piper and Jason took charge of cleaning the lower deck, which had been thrown into chaos during the monster attack. Reorganising sickbay and battening down the storage area took them most of the day, but Piper didn't mind. For one thing, she got to spend time with Jason. For another, last night's explosions had given Piper a healthy respect for Greek fire. She didn't want any loose vials of that stuff rolling through the corridors in the middle of the night. As they were fixing up the stables, Piper thought about the night Annabeth and Percy had spent down here accidentally. Piper wished that she could talk with Jason all night, just curl up on the stable floor and enjoy being with him. Why didn't they get to break the rules? But Jason wasn't like that. He was hardwired to be a leader and set a good example. Breaking the rules didn't come naturally to him. No doubt Rayner admired that about him. Piper did. Too, mostly. The one time she'd convinced him to rebel was back on the wilderness school, when they had sneaked onto the roof at night to watch a meteor shower. That's where they'd had their first kiss. Unfortunately, that memory was a trick of the mist, a magical lie implanted in her head by Hera. Piper and Jason were together now, in real life, but their relationship had been founded on an illusion. If Piper tried to get the real Jason to sneak out at night, would he do it? She swept the hay into piles. Jason fixed a broken door on one of the stables. The glass floor hatch glowed from the ocean below, a green expanse of light and shadow that seemed to go down forever. Piper kept glancing over, afraid she'd see a monster's face peeping in, or the water cannibals from her grandfather's old stories, but all she saw was an occasional school of herring. As she watched Jason work, she admired how easily he did each task, whether it was fixing a door or oiling saddles. It wasn't just his strong arms and his skillful hands, though. Piper liked those just fine, but the way he acted so upbeat and confident. He did what needed to be done without complaint. He kept his sense of humour, despite the fact that the guy had to be dead on his feet after not having slept the night before. Piper couldn't blame Rayner for having a crush on him. When it came to work and duty, Jason was Roman to the core. Piper thought about her mother's tea party in Charleston. She wondered what the goddess had told Rayner a year ago, and why it had changed the way Rayner treated Jason. Had Aphrodite encouraged her to like or dislike Jason? Piper wasn't sure, but she wished her mum hadn't appeared in Charleston. Regular mothers were embarrassing enough. Godly glamour mums who invited your friends over for tea and guy talk. That was just mortifying. Aphrodite had paid so much attention to Annabeth and Hazel that it had made Piper uneasy. When her mum got interested in somebody's love life, usually that was a bad sign. It meant trouble was coming, or, as Aphrodite would say, twists and turns. But also, Piper was secretly hurt not to have her mother to herself. Aphrodite had barely looked at her. She hadn't said a word about Jason. She hadn't bothered explaining her conversation with Raina at all. It was almost as if Aphrodite no longer found Piper interesting. Piper had got her guy. Now it was up to her to make things work, and Aphrodite had moved on to newer gossip as easily as she might toss out an old copy of a tabloid magazine. All of you are such excellent stories, Aphrodite had said. I mean, girls. Piper hadn't appreciated that, but part of her had thought, fine, I don't want to be a story. I want a nice steady life with a nice steady boyfriend. If only she knew more about making relationships work. She was supposed to be an expert, being the head counsellor for Aphrodite Cabin. Other campers at Camp Half-Blood came to her for advice all the time. Piper had tried to do her best, but with her own boyfriend she was clueless. She was constantly second-guessing herself, reading too much into Jason's expressions, his moods, his offhand comments. Why did it have to be so hard? Why couldn't there be a happily ever after ride into the sunset feeling all the time? What are you thinking? Jason asked. Piper realised she'd been making a sour face. In the reflection of the glass bay doors, she looked like she'd swallowed a teaspoon of salt. Nothing, she said. I mean, a lot of things. Kind of all at once. Jason laughed. The scar on his lip almost disappeared when he smiled. Considering all the stuff he'd been through, it was amazing that he could be in such a good mood. It's going to work out, he promised. You said to yourself. Yeah, Piper agreed, except I was just saying that to make Annabeth feel better. Jason shrugged. Still, it's true. We're almost to the ancient lands. We've left the Romans behind. And now they're on their way to Camp Half-Blood to attack our friends. Jason hesitated, as if it were hard for him to put a positive spin on that. Chiron will find a way to stall them. The Romans might take weeks to actually find the camp and plan their attack. Besides, Raina will do what she can to slow things down. She's still on our side. I know she is. You trust her? Piper's voice sounded hollow, even to herself. Look, Pipes, I told you. You've got nothing to be jealous about. She's beautiful. She's powerful. She's so Roman. Jason put down his hammer. He took her hand, which sent a tingle up her arm. Piper's dad had once taken her to the aquarium of the Pacific and shown her an electric eel. He told her that the eel sent out pulses that shocked and paralysed its prey. Every time Jason looked at her or touched her hand, Piper felt like that. You're beautiful and powerful, he said, and I don't want you to be a Roman. I want you to be Piper. Besides, we're a team, you and me. She wanted to believe him. They'd been together, really, for months now. Still, she couldn't get rid of her doubts, any more than Jason could get rid of the SPQR tattoo burned on his forearm. Above them, the ship's bell rang for dinner. Jason smirked. We'd better get up there. We don't want Coach Hedge trying tying bells around our necks. Piper shuddered. Coach Hedge had threatened to do that after the Percy Annabeth scandal, so he'd know if anyone sneaked out at night. Yeah, she said regretfully, looking at the glass doors below their feet. I guess we need dinner. And a good night's sleep. Chapter 26. Piper. The next morning, Piper woke to a different ship's horn, a blast so loud it literally shook her out of bed. She wondered if Leo was pulling another joke. Then the horn boomed again. It sounded like it was coming from several hundred yards away, from another vessel. She rushed to get dressed. By the time she got up on deck, the others had already gathered, all hastily dressed except for Coach Hedge, who had pulled the night watch. Frank's Vancouver Winter Olympic shirt was inside out. Percy wore pyjama bottoms and a bronze breastplate, which was an interesting fashion statement. Hazel's hair was all blown to one side, as though she'd walked through a cyclone. And Leo had accidentally set himself on fire. His t-shirt was in charred tatters. His arms were smoking. About 100 yards to port, a massive cruise ship glided past. Tourists waved at them from 15 or 16 rows of balconies. Some smiled and took pictures. None of them looked surprised to see an ancient Greek terreme. But maybe the mist made it look like a fishing boat, or perhaps the cruisers thought the Argo II was a tourist attraction. The cruise ship blew its horn again, and the Argo II had a shaking fit. Coach Hedge plugged his ears. Do they have to be so loud? They're just saying hi, Frank speculated. What? Hedge yelled back. The ship edged past them, heading out to sea. The tourists kept waving. If they found it strange that the Argo II was populated by half-asleep kids in armour and pyjamas and a man with goat legs, they didn't let on. Bye, Leo called, raising his smoking hand. Can I man the ballast, Hedge asked. No, Leo said through a forced smile. Hazel rubbed her eyes and looked across the glittering green water. Where are... Oh, wow. Piper followed her gaze and gasped. Without the cruise ship blocking their view, she saw a mountain jutting from the sea, less than half a mile to the north. Piper had seen impressive cliffs before. She'd driven Highway 1 along the California coast. She'd even fallen down the Grand Canyon with Jason and flown back up. But neither was as amazing as this massive fist of blinding white rock thrust into the sky. On one side, the limestone cliffs were almost completely sheer, dropping into the sea over 1,000 feet below, as near as Piper could figure. On the other side, the mountains sloped in tiers, covered in green forest, so that the whole thing reminded Piper of a colossal sphinx, worn down over the millennia, with a massive white head and chest, and a green cloak over its back. The Rock of Gibraltar, Annabeth said in awe, at the tip of Spain, and over there. She pointed south to a more distant stretch of red and ochre hills. That must be Africa. We're at the mouth of the Mediterranean. The morning was warm, but Piper shivered. Despite the wide stretch of sea in front of them, she felt like she was standing at an impassable barrier. Once in the Mediterranean, the Mare Nostrum, they would be in the ancient lands. If the legends were true, their quest would become 10 times more dangerous. What now? She asked. Do we just sail in? Why not? Leo said. It's a big shipping channel. Boats go in and out all the time. Not triremes full of demigods, Piper thought. Annabeth gazed at the Rock of Gibraltar. Piper recognised that brooding expression on her friend's face. It almost always meant that she anticipated trouble. In the old days, Annabeth said, they called this area the Pillars of Hercules. The rock was supposed to be one pillar. The other was one of the African mountains. Nobody is sure which one. Hercules, huh? Percy frowned. That guy was like the Starbucks of ancient Greece. Everywhere you turn, there he is. A thunderous boom shook the Argo too, though Piper wasn't sure where it came from this time. She didn't see any other ships, and the skies were clear. Her mouth suddenly felt dry. So, these Pillars of Hercules, are they dangerous? Annabeth stayed focused on the white cliffs, as if waiting for the mark of Athena to blaze into life. For Greeks, the pillars marked the end of the known world. The Romans said the pillars were inscribed with a Latin warning. Non plus ultra, Percy said. Annabeth looked stunned. Yeah, nothing further beyond. How did you know? Percy pointed. Because I'm looking at it. Directly ahead of them, in the middle of the straits, an island had shimmered into existence. Piper was positive no island had been there before. It was a small hilly mass of land, covered in forests and ringed with white beaches. Not very impressive compared to Gibraltar, but in front of the island, jutting from waves about 100 yards offshore, were 2 white Grecian columns, as tall as the Argo's masts. Between the columns, huge silver swords and words glittered underwater. Maybe an illusion, or maybe inlaid in the sand. Non plus ultra. Guys, do I turn around? Leo asked nervously. Or... No one answered. Maybe because, like Piper, they had noticed the figure standing on the beach. As the ship approached the columns, she saw a dark-haired man in purple robes, his arms crossed, staring intently at their ship as if he were expecting them. Piper couldn't tell much else about him from this distance, but judging from his posture, he wasn't happy. Frank inhaled sharply. Could that be... Hercules, Jason said, the most powerful demigod of all time. The Argo 2 was only a few hundred yards from the columns now. Need an answer, Leo said urgently. I can turn or we can take off. The stabilizers are working again, but I need to know quick. We have to keep going, Annabeth said. I think he's guarding these straits. If that's really Hercules, sailing or flying away won't do any good. He'll want to talk to us. Piper resisted the urge to use charm speak. She wanted to yell at Leo, Fly! Get us out of here! Unfortunately, she had a feeling that Annabeth was right. If they wanted to pass into the Mediterranean, they couldn't avoid this meeting. Won't Hercules be on our side? She asked hopefully. I mean, he's one of us, right? Jason grunted. He was a son of Zeus, but when he died he became a god. You can never be sure with gods. Piper remembered their meeting with Bacchus in Kansas, another god who used to be a demigod. He hadn't been exactly helpful. Great, Percy said. 7 of us against Hercules. And a satyr, Hedge added. We can take him. I've got a better idea, Annabeth said. We send ambassadors ashore, a small group, 1 or 2 at most. Try to talk with him. I'll go, Jason said. He's a son of Zeus. I'm the son of Jupiter. Maybe he'll be friendly to me. Or maybe he'll hate you, Percy suggested. Half-brothers don't always get along. Jason scowled. Thank you, Mr. Optimism. It's worth a shot, Annabeth said. At least Jason and Hercules have something in common, and we need our best diplomat, somebody who's good with words. All eyes turned to Piper. She tried to avoid screaming and jumping over the side. A bad premonition gnawed at her gut. But if Jason was going ashore, she wanted to be with him. Maybe this hugely powerful god would turn out to be helpful. They had to have good luck once in a while, didn't they? Fine, she said. Just let me change my clothes. Once Leo had anchored the Argo 2 between the pillars, Jason summoned the wind to carry him and Piper ashore. The man in purple was waiting for them. Piper had heard tons of stories about Hercules. She'd seen several cheesy movies and cartoons. Before today, if she had thought about him at all, she'd just roll her eyes and imagine some stupid hairy dude in his 30s, with a barrel chest and a gross hippie beard, with a lion skin over his head and a big club like a caveman. She imagined he would smell bad, belch and scratch himself a lot, and speak mostly in grunts. She was not expecting this. His feet were bare, covered in white sand. His robes made him look like a priest, though Piper couldn't remember which rank of priest wore purple. Was that cardinals? Bishops? And did the purple colour mean he was the Roman version of Hercules rather than the Greek? His beard was fashionably scruffy, like Piper's dad, and his actor friends wore theirs. The sort of, I just happened not to shave for 2 days, and I still look awesome, look. He was well built, but not too stocky. His ebony hair was close-cropped, Roman style. He had startling blue eyes like Jason's, but his skin was coppery, as if he'd spent his entire life on a tanning bed. The most surprising thing, he looked about 20. Definitely no older. He was handsome in a rugged but not at all caveman way. He did in fact have a club, which lay in the sand next to him, but it was more like an oversized baseball bat, a 5-foot-long polished cylinder of mahogany with a leather hand grip studded in bronze. Coach Hedge would have been jealous. Jason and Piper landed at the edge of the surf. They approached slowly, careful not to make any threatening moves. Hercules watched them with no particular emotion, as if they were some form of seabird he had never noticed before. "Hello," Piper said. Always a good start. "What's up?" Hercules said. His voice was deep but casual, very modern. He could have been greeting them in the high school locker room. Not much," Piper winced. "Well, actually a lot. I'm Piper. This is Jason. Where's your lion skin?" Jason interrupted. Piper wanted to elbow him, but Hercules looked more amused than annoyed. "It's 90 degrees out here," he said. "Why would I wear my lion skin? Do you wear a fur coat to the beach?" "I guess that makes sense." Jason sounded disappointed. "It's just that the pictures always show you with a lion skin." Hercules glared at the sky accusingly, like he wanted to have words with his father Zeus. "Don't believe everything you hear about me. Being famous isn't as fun as you might think." "Tell me about it," Piper sighed. Hercules fixed those brilliant blue eyes on her. "Are you famous?" "My dad, he's in the movies." Hercules snarled. "Don't get me started with the movies. Gods of Olympus, they never get anything right. Have you seen one movie about me where I look like me?" Piper had to admit he had a point. "I'm surprised you're so young." "Ha! Being immortal helps, but yes, I wasn't so old when I died. Not by modern standards. I did a lot during my years as a hero. Too much, really." His eyes drifted to Jason. "Son of Zeus, eh?" "Jupiter," Jason said. "Not much difference," Hercules grumbled. "Dad's annoying in either form. Me, I was called Heracles. Then the Romans came along and named me Hercules. I didn't really change that much, though lately just thinking about it gives me splitting headaches." The left side of his face twitched. His robe shimmered, momentarily turning white, then back to purple. "At any rate," Hercules said, "if you're Jupiter's son, you might understand. It's a lot of pressure. Enough is never enough. Eventually it can make a guy snap." He turned to Piper. She felt like 1,000 ants were crawling up her back. There was a mixture of sadness and darkness in his eyes that seemed not quite sane and definitely not safe. "As for you, my dear," Hercules said, "be careful. Sons of Zeus can be well, never mind." Piper wasn't sure what that meant. Suddenly she wanted to get as far from this god as possible, but she tried to maintain a calm, polite expression. "So, Lord Hercules," she said, "we're on a quest. We'd like permission to pass into the Mediterranean." Hercules shrugged. "That's why I'm here. After I died, Dad made me the doorkeeper of Olympus. I said, great, palace duty, party all the time. What he didn't mention is that I'd be guarding the doors to the ancient lands, stuck on this island for the rest of eternity. Lots of fun." He pointed at the pillars rising from the surf. "Stupid columns. Some people claim I created the whole Strait of Gibraltar by shoving mountains apart. Some people say the mountains are the pillars. What a bunch of organ manure. The pillars are pillars." "Right," Piper said. "Naturally. So, can we pass?" The god scratched his fashionable beard. "Well, I have to give you the standard warning about how dangerous the ancient lands are. Not just any demigod can survive the Mare Nostrum. Because of that, I have to give you a quest to complete. Prove your worth, blah, blah, blah. Honestly, I don't make a big deal of it. Usually I give demigods something simple, like a shopping trip, singing a funny song, that sort of thing. After all these labours I had to complete for my evil cousin, Eurystheus, well, I don't want to be that guy, you know? Appreciate it, Jason said. Hey, no problem. Hercules sounded relaxed and easygoing, but he still made Piper nervous. That dark glint in his eyes reminded her of charcoal soaked in kerosene, ready to go up at a moment's notice. So, anyway, Hercules said, what's your quest? Giants, Jason said. We're off to Greece to stop them from awakening Gaia. Giants? Hercules muttered. I hate those guys. Back when I was a demigod hero. But never mind. So, which god put you up to this? Dad? Athena? Maybe Aphrodite? He raised an eyebrow at Piper. As pretty as you are, I'm guessing that's your mum. Piper should have been thinking faster, but Hercules had unsettled her. Too late, she realised the conversation had become a minefield. Hera sent us, Jason said. She brought us together to... Hera? Suddenly Hercules' expression was like the cliffs of Gibraltar, a solid, unforgiving sheet of stone. We hate her too, Piper said quickly. Gods, why hadn't it occurred to her? Hera had been Hercules' mortal enemy. We didn't want to help her. She didn't give us much choice, but here you are, Hercules said, all friendliness gone. Sorry, you two. I don't care how worthy your quest is. I don't do anything that Hera wants, ever. Jason looked mystified. But I thought you made up with her when you became a god. Like I said, Hercules grumbled, don't believe everything you hear. If you want to pass into the Mediterranean, I'm afraid I've got to give you an extra hard quest. But we're like brothers, Jason protested. Hera's messed with my life too. I understand. You understand nothing, Hercules said coldly. My first family, dead. My life wasted on ridiculous quests. My second wife, dead, after being tricked into poisoning me and leaving me to a painful demise. And my compensation? I got to become a minor god, immortal, so I can never forget my pain. Stuck here as a gatekeeper, a doorman, a butler for the Olympians. No, you don't understand. The only god who understands me even a little bit is Dionysus. And at least he invented something useful. I have something to show. I have nothing to show except bad film adaptations of my life. Piper turned on the charm speak. That's horribly sad, Lord Hercules. But please go easy on us. We're not bad people. She thought she'd succeeded. Hercules hesitated. Then his jaw tightened. And he shook his head. On the opposite side of the island, over those hills, you'll find a river. In the middle of that river lies the old god Aeschylus. Hercules waited, as if this information could send them running in terror. And? Jason asked. And, Hercules said, I want you to break off his other horn and bring it to me. He has horns, Jason said. Wait, his other horn? What? Figure it out, the god snapped. Here, this should help. He said the word help like it meant hurt. From under his robes, Hercules took a small book and tossed it to Piper. She barely caught it. The book's glossy cover showed a photographic montage of Greek temples and smiling monsters. The Minotaur was giving the thumbs up. The title read, The Hercules Guide to the Mare Nostrum. Bring me that horn by sundown, Hercules said. Just the two of you, no contacting your friends. Your ship will remain where it is. If you succeed, you may pass into the Mediterranean. And if we don't? Piper asked, pretty sure she didn't want the answer. Well, Aeschylus will kill you, obviously, Hercules said, and I will break your ship in half with my bare hands and send your friends to an early grave. Jason shifted his feet. Couldn't we just sing a funny song? I'd get going, Hercules said coldly. Sundown, or your friends are dead. Chapter 27, Piper. The Hercules Guide to the Mare Nostrum didn't help much, with snakes and mosquitoes. If this is a magic island, Piper grumbled, why couldn't it be a nice magic island? They tromped up a hill and down into a heavily wooded valley, careful to avoid the black and red striped snakes, sunning themselves on the rocks. Mosquitoes swarmed over stagnant ponds in the lowest areas. The trees were mostly stunted olives, cypress and pines. The churring of the cicadas and the oppressive heat reminded Piper of the res in Oklahoma during the summer. So far they hadn't found any river. We could fly, Jason suggested again. We might miss something, Piper said. Besides, I'm not sure I want to drop in on an unfriendly god. What was his name? Etch-a-sketch? Aeschylus. Jason was trying to read the guidebook while they walked, so he kept running into trees and stumbling over rocks. Says he's a potamus. He's a hippopotamus. No, Potamus, a river god. According to this, he's the spirit of some river in Greece. Since we're not in Greece, let's assume he's moved, Piper said. Doesn't bode well for how useful that book is going to be. Anything else? Says Hercules fought him one time, Jason offered. Hercules fought 99% of everything in ancient Greece. Yeah, let's see. Pillars of Hercules. Jason flipped a page. Says here this island has no hotels, no restaurants, no transportation. Attractions, Hercules and 2 pillars. Huh, this is interesting. Supposedly the dollar sign, the S with the 2 lines through it. That came from the Spanish coat of arms, which showed the pillars of Hercules with a banner curling between them. Great, Piper thought. Jason finally gets along with Annabeth and her brainiac tendencies start rubbing off on him. Anything helpful, she asked. Wait, here's a tiny reference to Aeschylus. This river god fought Hercules for the hand of the beautiful Diana. Well, during that struggle, Hercules broke off one of the river god's horns, which became the first cornucopia. Corn of what? It's that Thanksgiving decoration, Jason said. The horn with all the goodies spilling out. We have some in the mess hall at Camp Jupiter. I don't know the original one. Well, I didn't know it was actually some guy's horn. And we're supposed to take his other one, Piper said. I'm guessing that won't be so easy. Who was Deianira? Hercules married her, Jason said. I think. Doesn't say here, but I think, something bad happened to her? Piper remembered what Hercules had told them. His first family dead, his second wife dead after being tricked into poisoning him. She was liking this challenge less and less. They trudged across a ridge between 2 hills, trying to stay in the shade, but Piper was already soaked with perspiration. The mosquitoes left welts on her ankles, arms and neck, so she probably looked like a smallpox victim. She'd finally got some alone time with Jason, and this was how they spent it. She was irritated with Jason for having mentioned Hera, but she knew she shouldn't blame him. Maybe she was just irritated with him in general. Ever since Camp Jupiter, she'd been carrying around a lot of worry and resentment. She wondered what Hercules had wanted to tell her about the sons of Zeus. They couldn't be trusted? They were under too much pressure? Piper tried to imagine Jason becoming a god when he died, standing on some beach guarding the gates to an ocean long after Piper and everyone else he knew in his mortal life were dead. She wondered if Hercules had ever been as positive as Jason, more upbeat, confident, quick to comfort. It was hard to picture. As they hiked down into the next valley, Piper wondered what was happening back on the Argo too. She was tempted to send an Iris message, but Hercules had warned them not to contact their friends. She hoped Annabeth could guess what was going on and didn't try to send another party ashore. Piper wasn't sure what Hercules would do if he were bothered further. She imagined Coach Hedge getting impatient and aiming a ballista at the man in purple, or Eidolons possessing the crew and forcing them to commit suicide by Hercules. Piper shuddered. She didn't know what time it was, but the sun was already starting to sink. How had the day passed so quickly? She would have welcomed sundown for the cooler temperatures, except it was also their deadline. A cool night breeze wouldn't mean much if they were dead. Besides, tomorrow was the 1st of July, the calends of July. If their information was correct, it would be Nico D'Angelo's last day of life, and the day Rome was destroyed. Stop, Jason said. Piper wasn't sure what was wrong. Then she realised she could hear running water up ahead. They crept through the trees and found themselves on the bank of a river. It was maybe 40 feet wide, but only a few inches deep. A silver sheet of water racing over a smooth bed of stones. A few yards downstream, the rapids plunged into a dark blue, swimming hole. Something about the river bothered her. The cicadas in the trees had gone quiet. No birds were chirping. It was as if the water was giving a lecture and would only allow its own voice. But the more Piper listened, the more inviting the river seemed. She wanted to take a drink. Maybe she should take off her shoes. Her feet could really use a soak. And that swimming hole, it would be so nice to jump in with Jason and relax in the shade of the trees, floating in the nice cool water. So romantic. Piper shook herself. These thoughts weren't hers. Something was wrong. It almost felt like the river was charm-speaking. Jason sat on a rock and started taking off his shoes. He grinned at the swimming hole like he couldn't wait to get in. Cut it out, Piper yelled at the river. Jason looked startled. Cut what out? Not you, Piper said. Him. She felt silly pointing at the water, but she was certain it was working some sort of magic, swaying their feelings. Just when she thought she had lost it and Jason would tell her so, the river spoke. Forgive me. Singing is one of the few pleasures I have left. A figure emerged from the swimming hole, as if rising on an elevator. Piper's shoulders tensed. It was the creature she'd seen in her knife blade, the bull, with the human face. His skin was as blue as the water, his hooves levitated on the river's surface. At the top of the bovine neck was the head of a man with short curly black hair, a beard done in ringlets, ancient Greek style. Deep, mournful eyes behind bifocal glasses, and a mouth that seemed set in a permanent pout. Sprouting from the left side of his head was a single bull's horn, a curved black and white one, like warriors might turn into drinking cups. The imbalance made his head tilt to one side, to the left, so that he looked like he was trying to get water out of his ear. "Hello," he said sadly. "Come to kill me, I suppose?" Jason put his shoes back on and stood slowly. Well, no," Piper intervened. "I'm sorry, this is embarrassing. We didn't want to bother you, but Hercules sent us." "Hercules?" The bull man sighed. His hooves pawed the water as if ready to charge. "To me, he'll always be Heracles. That's his Greek name, you know, the glory of Hera." "Funny name," Jason said, "since he hates it. And he hates her." "Indeed," the bull man said. "Perhaps that's why he didn't protest when the Romans renamed him Hercules. Of course, that's the name most people know him by. His brand, if you will. Hercules is nothing if not image-conscious." The bull man spoke with bitterness but familiarity, as if Hercules were an old friend who had lost his way. "You're Achilles?" Piper asked. The bull man bent his front legs and lowered his head in a bow, which Piper found both sweet and a little sad. "At your service, river god extraordinaire, once the spirit of the mightiest river in Greece, now sentenced to dwell here on the opposite side of the island from an old enemy. Oh, the gods are cruel. But whether they put us so close together to punish me or Hercules, I have never been sure." Piper wasn't sure what he meant, but the background noise of the river was invading her mind again, reminding her how hot and thirsty she felt, how pleasant a nice swim would be. She tried to focus. "I'm Piper," she said. "This is Jason. We don't want to fight. It's just that Hercules, whoever he is, got mad at us and sent us here." She explained about their quest to the ancient lands to stop the giants from waking Gaia. She described how their team of Greeks and Romans had come together, and how Hercules had thrown a temper tantrum when he found out Hera was behind it. Achilles kept tipping his head to the left, so Piper wasn't sure if he was dozing off or dealing with one-horn fatigue. When she was done, Achilles regarded her as if she were developing a regrettable skin rash. "Ah, my dear, the legends are true, you know. The spirits, the water cannibals." Piper had to fight back a whimper. She hadn't told Achilles anything about that. "How? River gods know many things," he said. "Alas, you are focusing on the wrong story. If you had made it to Rome, the story of the flood would have served you better." "Piper?" Jason asked. "What's he talking about?" Her thoughts were suddenly as jumbled as kaleidoscope glass. The story of the flood. If you had made it to Rome. I'm not sure," she said, though the mention of a flood story rang a distant bell. "Achilles, I don't understand." "No, you don't," the river god sympathized. "Poor thing, another girl stuck with a son of Zeus." "Wait a minute," Jason said. "It's Jupiter, actually, and how does that make her a poor thing?" Achilles ignored him. "My girl, do you know the cause of my fight with Hercules?" "It was over a woman," Piper recalled. "Deianira?" "Yes," Achilles heaved a sigh. "And do you know what happened to her?" Piper glanced at Jason. He took out his guidebook and began flipping through pages. "It doesn't really—" Achilles snorted indignantly. "What is that?" Jason blinked. "Just the Hercules Guide to Mare Nostrum. He gave us the guidebook, so—" "That is not a book," Achilles insisted. "He gave you that just to get under my skin, didn't he? He knows I hate those things." "You hate books?" Piper asked. "Bah!" Achilles' face flushed, turning his blue skin aubergine purple. "That's not a book." He poured the water. A scroll shot from the river like a miniature rocket and landed in front of him. He nudged it open with his hooves. The weathered yellow parchment unfurled, covered with faded Latin script and elaborate hand-drawn pictures. "This is a book," Achilles said. "Oh, the smell of sheepskin, the elegant feel of the scroll unrolling beneath my hooves. You simply can't duplicate it in something like that." He nodded indignantly at the guidebook in Jason's hand. "You young folks today and your newfangled gadgets, bound pages, little compact squares of text that are not hoof-friendly. That's a bound book, a bee book, if you must. But it's not a traditional book. It'll never replace the good old-fashioned scroll. I'll just put this away now." Jason slipped the guidebook in his back pocket, the way he might holster a dangerous weapon. Achilles seemed to calm down a little, which was a relief to Piper. She didn't need to get run over by a one-horned bull with a scroll obsession. "Now," Achilles said, tapping a picture on his scroll, "this is Deianira." Piper knelt down to look. The hand-painted portrait was small, but she could tell the woman had been very beautiful, with long dark hair, dark eyes, and a playful smile that probably drove guys crazy. "Princess of Calydon," the river god said mournfully. "She was promised to me until Hercules butted in. He insisted on combat." "And he broke off your horn?" Jason guessed. "Yes," Achilles said. "I could never forgive him for that. Horribly uncomfortable, having only one horn. But the situation was worse for poor Deianira. She could have had a long, happy life married to me." "A man-headed bull," Piper said. Who lives in a river? Exactly, Achilles agreed. It seems impossible she would refuse, eh? Instead, she went off with Hercules. She picked the handsome, flashy hero over the good, faithful husband who would have treated her well. What happened next? Well, she should have known. Hercules was much too wrapped up in his own problems to be a good husband. He had already murdered one wife, you know. Hera cursed him, so he flew into a rage and killed his entire family. Horrible business. That's why he had to do those 12 labours as penance. Piper felt appalled. Wait, Hera made him crazy and Hercules had to do the penance. Achilles shrugged. The Olympians never seem to pay for their crimes, and Hera has always hated the sons of Zeus or Jupiter. He glanced distrustfully at Jason. At any rate, my poor Deianira had a tragic end. She became jealous of Hercules' many affairs. He gallivanted all over the world, you see, just like his father, Zeus, flirting with every woman he met. Finally, Deianira got so desperate she listened to bad advice. A crafty centaur named Nessus told her that if she wanted Hercules to be faithful forever, she should spread some centaur blood on the inside of Hercules' favourite shirt. Unfortunately, Nessus was lying because he wanted revenge on Hercules. Deianira followed his instructions, but instead of making Hercules a faithful husband. Centaur blood is like acid, Jason said. Yes, Achilles said. Hercules died a painful death. When Deianira realised what she'd done, The river god drew a line across his neck. That's awful, Piper said. And the moral, my dear, Achilles said. Beware the sons of Zeus. Piper couldn't look at her boyfriend. She wasn't sure she could mask the uneasiness in her eyes. Jason would never be like Hercules, but the story played into all her fears. Hera had manipulated their relationship, just as she had manipulated Hercules. Piper wanted to believe that Jason could never go into a murderous frenzy like Hercules had. Then again, only 4 days ago he had been controlled by an eidolon and almost killed Percy Jackson. Hercules is a god now, Achilles said. He married Hebe, the youth goddess, but still he is rarely at home. He dwells here on the island guarding those silly pillars. He says Zeus makes him do this, but I think he prefers being here to Mount Olympus, nursing his bitterness and mourning his mortal life. My presence reminds him of his failures, especially the woman who finally killed him. And his presence reminds me of poor Deianira, who could have been my wife. The bullman tapped the scroll, which rolled itself up and sank into the water. Hercules wants my other horn in order to humiliate me, Achilles said. Perhaps it would make him feel better about himself, knowing that I'm miserable too. Besides, the horn would become a cornucopia. Good food and drink would flow from it, just as my power causes the river to flow. No doubt Hercules would keep the cornucopia for himself. It would be a tragedy and a waste. Piper suspected the noise of the river and the drowsy sound of Achilles' voice was still affecting her thoughts, but she couldn't help agreeing with the river god. She was starting to hate Hercules. This poor bullman seemed so sad and lonely. Jason stirred. I'm sorry, Achilles. Honestly, you've got a bum deal, but maybe, well, about the other horn. You might not be so lopsided. It might feel better. Jason, Piper protested. Jason held up his hands. Just a thought. Besides, I don't see that we have many choices. If Hercules doesn't get that horn, he'll kill us and our friends. He's right, Achilles said. You have no choice, which is why I hope you'll forgive me. Piper frowned. The river god sounded so heartbroken, she wanted to pat his head. Forgive you for what? I have no choice either, Achilles said. I have to stop you. The river exploded and a wall of water crashed over Piper. Chapter 28. Piper. The current grabbed her like a fist and pulled her into the deep. Struggling was useless. She clamped her mouth shut, forcing herself not to inhale, but she could barely keep from panicking. She couldn't see anything but a torrent of bubbles. She could only hear her own thrashing and the dull roar of the rapids. She just about decided this is how she would die, drowning in a swimming hole on an island that didn't exist. Then, as suddenly as she'd been pulled under, she was thrust to the surface. She found herself at the centre of a whirlpool, able to breathe but unable to break free. A few yards away, Jason broke the surface and gasped, his sword in one hand. He swung wildly, but there was nothing to attack. 20 feet to Piper's right, Achilles rose from the water. I'm really sorry about this, he said. Jason lunged towards him, summoning his winds to lift him out of the river. But Achilles was quicker and more powerful. A curl of water slammed into Jason and sent him under once more. Stop it, Piper screamed. Using charm speak wasn't easy when she was floundering in a whirlpool, but she got Achilles' attention. I'm afraid I can't stop, said the river god. I can't let Hercules have my other horn. It would be mortifying. There's another way, Piper said. You don't have to kill us. Jason clawed his way to the surface again. A miniature storm cloud formed over his head. Thunder boomed. None of that, son of Jupiter, Achilles chided. If you call lightning, you'll just electrocute your girlfriend. The water pulled Jason under again. Let him go. Piper charged her voice with all the persuasiveness she could muster. I promise I won't let Hercules get the horn. Achilles hesitated. He cantered over to her, his head tilting to the left. I believe you mean that. I do, Piper promised. Hercules is despicable, but please, first let my friend go. The water churned where Jason had gone under. Piper wanted to scream. How much longer could he hold his breath? Achilles looked down at her through his bifocals. His expression softened. I see. You would be my Deianira. You would be my bride to compensate for my loss. What? Piper wasn't sure if she'd heard him right. The whirlpool was literally making her head spin. Actually, I was thinking... Oh, I understand, Achilles said. You were too modest to suggest this in front of your boyfriend. You are right, of course. I would treat you much better than a son of Zeus would. I could make things right after all these centuries. I could not save Deianira, but I could save you. Had it been 30 seconds now, a minute, Jason couldn't hold out much longer. You would have to let your friends die, Achilles continued. Hercules would be angry, but I can protect you from him. You could be quite happy together. Let's start... Well, we could be happy together. Let's start by letting that Jason fellow drown, eh? Piper could barely hold it together, but she had to concentrate. She masked her fear and her anger. She was a child of Aphrodite. She had to use the tools she was given. She smiled as sweetly as she could and raised her arms. Lift me up, please. Achilles' face brightened. He grabbed Piper's hands and pulled her out of the whirlpool. She'd never ridden a bull before, but she'd practiced bareback Pegasus riding at Camp Half-Blood, and she remembered what to do. She used her momentum, swinging one leg over Achilles' back. Then she locked her ankles round his neck, wrapped one arm around his throat and drew her knife with the other. She pressed the blade under the river god's chin. Let Jason go. She put all her force into the command. Now. Piper realised there were many flaws in her plan. The river god might simply dissolve into water, or he could pull her under and wait for her to drown. But apparently her charm speak worked. Or maybe Achilles was just too surprised to think straight. He probably wasn't used to pretty girls threatening to cut his throat. Jason shot out of the water like a human cannonball. He broke through the branches of an olive tree and tumbled onto the grass. That couldn't have felt good, but he struggled to his feet, gasping and coughing. He raised his sword and the dark clouds thickened over the river. Piper shot him a warning look. Not yet. She still had to get out of this river without drowning or getting electrocuted. Achilles arched his back as if contemplating a trick. Piper pressed the knife harder against his throat. Be a good bull, she warned. You promised, Achilles said through gritted teeth. You promised Hercules wouldn't get my horn. And he won't, Piper said, but I will. She raised her knife and slashed off the god's horn. The celestial bronze cut through the base like it was wet clay. Achilles bellowed in rage. Before he could recover, Piper stood up on his back. With his horn in one hand and her dagger in another, she leaped for the shore. Jason, she yelled. Thank the gods, he understood. A gust of wind caught her and carried her safely over the bank. Piper hit the ground rolling as the hairs on her neck stood up. A metallic smell filled the air. She turned towards the river in time to be blinded. Boom! Lightning stirred the water into a boiling cauldron, steaming and hissing with electricity. Piper blinked the yellow spots out of her eyes as the god Achilles wailed and dissolved beneath the surface. His horrified expression seemed to be asking, How could you? Jason, run! She was still dizzy and sick with fear, but she and Jason crashed through the woods. As she climbed the hill, clasping the bull's horn to her chest, Piper realised she was sobbing, though she wasn't sure if it was from fear or relief or shame at what she'd done to the old river god. They didn't slow down until they reached the crest of the hill. Piper felt silly, but she kept breaking down and crying as she told Jason what had happened while he was struggling underwater. Piper, you had no choice. He put his hand on her shoulder. You saved my life. She wiped her eyes and tried to control herself. The sun was nearing the horizon. They had to get back to Hercules quickly, or their friends would die. Achilles forced your hand, Jason continued. Besides, I doubt that lightning bolt killed him. He's an ancient god. You'd have to destroy his river to destroy him, and he can live without a horn. If you had to lie about not giving it to Hercules, well, I wasn't lying. Jason stared at her. Pipes, we don't have a choice. Hercules will kill. Hercules doesn't deserve this. Piper wasn't sure where this rage was coming from, but she had never felt more certain of anything in her life. Hercules was a bitter, selfish jerk. He'd hurt too many people, and he wanted to keep on hurting them. Maybe he'd had some bad breaks. Maybe the gods had kicked him around, but that didn't excuse it. A hero couldn't control the gods, but he should be able to control himself. Jason would never be like that. He would never blame others for his problems or make a grudge more important than doing the right thing. Piper was not going to repeat Deianira's story. She wasn't going to go along with what Hercules wanted just because he was handsome and strong and scary. He couldn't get his way this time, not after threatening their lives and sending them to make Achilles miserable for the sake of spiting Hera. Hercules didn't deserve a horn of plenty. Piper was going to put him in his place. "I have a plan," she said. She told Jason what to do. She didn't even realise she was using charm speak until his eyes glazed over. "Whatever you say," he whispered. Then he blinked a few times. "We're going to die, but I'm in." Hercules was waiting right where they'd left him. He was staring at the Argo 2, docked between the pillars as the sun set behind it. The ship looked okay, but Piper's plan had started to feel insane to her. Too late to reconsider, she'd already sent an iris message to Leo. Jason was prepared, and seeing Hercules again, she felt more certain than ever she couldn't give him what he wanted. Hercules didn't exactly brighten when he saw Piper carrying the bull's horn, but his scowl lines lessened. "Good," he said, "you got it. In that case, you are free to go." Piper glanced at Jason. "You heard him. He gave us permission." She turned back to the god. "That means our ship will be able to pass into the Mediterranean." Yes, Hercules snapped his fingers. "Now, the horn." "No," Piper said. The god frowned. "Excuse me." She raised the cornucopia. Since she'd cut it from Achilles' head, the horn had hollowed out, becoming smooth and dark on the inside. It didn't appear magical, but Piper was counting on its power. "Achilles was right," she said. "You're his curse as much as he is yours. You're a sorry excuse for a hero." Hercules stared at her as if she was speaking in Japanese. "You realize I could kill you with a flick of my finger," he said. "I could throw my club at your ship and cut straight through its hull. You could shut up," Jason said. He drew his sword. "Maybe Zeus is different from Jupiter, because I wouldn't put up with any brother who acts like you." The veins on Hercules' neck turned as purple as his robes. "You would not be the first demigod I've killed." "Jason is better than you," Piper said. "But don't worry, we're not going to fight you. We're going to leave this island with the horn. You don't deserve it as a prize. I'm going to keep it, to remind me of what not to be like as a demigod, and to remind me of poor Achilles and Deianira." The god's nostrils flared. "Do not mention that name! You can't seriously think I'm worried about your puny boyfriend. No one is stronger than me." "I didn't say stronger," Piper corrected. "I said he's better." Piper pointed the mouth of the horn at Hercules. She let go of the resentment and doubt and anger she'd been harbouring since Camp Jupiter. She concentrated on all the good things she'd shared with Jason Grace. Soaring upward in the Grand Canyon, walking on the beach at Camp Half-Blood, holding hands at the sing-along and watching the stars, sitting by the strawberry fields together on lazy afternoons and listening to the satyrs play their pipes. She thought about a future when the giants had been defeated, Gaia was asleep, and they would live happily together. No jealousy, no monsters left to battle. She filled her heart with those thoughts, and she felt the cornucopia grow warm. The horn blasted forth a flood of food as powerful as Achilles' river. A torrent of fresh fruit, baked goods, and smoked hams completely buried Hercules. Piper didn't understand how all that stuff could fit through the entrance of the horn, but she thought the hams were especially appropriate. When it had spewed out enough goodies to fill a house, the horn shut itself off. Piper heard Hercules shrieking and struggling somewhere underneath. Apparently, even the strongest god in the world could be caught off guard when buried under fresh produce. "Go," she told Jason, who'd forgotten his part of the plan and was staring in amazement at the fruit pile. "Go!" He grabbed Piper's wrist and summoned the wind. They shot away from the island so quickly that Piper almost got whiplash, but it wasn't a second too soon. As the island retreated from view, Hercules' head broke above the mound of goodies. Half a coconut was stuck on his noggin, like a war helmet. "Kill!" he bellowed, like he'd had a lot of practice saying it. Jason touched down on the deck of the Argo 2. Thankfully, Leo had done his part. The ship's oars were already in aerial mode. The anchor was up. Jason summoned a gale so strong it pushed them into the sky, while Percy sent a 10-foot-tall wave against the shore, knocking Hercules down a second time in a cascade of seawater and pineapples. By the time the god regained his feet and started lobbing coconuts at them from far below, the Argo 2 was already sailing through the clouds above the Mediterranean. Chapter 29. Percy. Percy was not feeling the love. Bad enough he'd been run out of Atlanta by evil sea gods. Then he had failed to stop a giant shrimp attack on the Argo 2. Then the Ichthyo centaurs, Chiron's brothers, hadn't even wanted to meet him. After all that, they had arrived at the Pillars of Hercules, and Percy had to stay aboard ship while Jason the Big Shot visited his half-brother, Hercules, the most famous demigod of all time, and Percy didn't get to meet him either. Okay, sure, from what Piper said afterwards, Hercules was a jerk, but still, Percy was getting kind of tired of staying aboard ship and pacing the deck. The open sea was supposed to be his territory. Percy was supposed to step up, take charge and keep everybody safe. Instead, all the way across the Atlantic, he'd done pretty much nothing except make small talk with sharks and listen to Coach Hedge sing TV theme songs. To make matters worse, Annabeth had been distant ever since they had left Charleston. She spent most of her time in her cabin, studying the bronze map she'd retrieved from Fort Sumter, or looking up information on Daedalus's laptop. Whenever Percy stopped by to see her, she was so lost in thought that the conversation went something like this. Percy: "Hey, how's it going?" Annabeth: "No thanks." Percy: "Okay, have you eaten anything today?" Annabeth: "I think Leo is on duty, ask him." Percy: "So my hair is on fire?" Annabeth: "Okay, in a while." She got like this sometimes. It was one of the challenges of dating an Athena girl. Still, Percy wondered what he had to do to get her attention. He was worried about her after her encounter with the spiders at Fort Sumter, and he didn't know how to help her, especially if she shut him out. After leaving the Pillars of Hercules, unscathed except for a few coconuts lodged in the hull's bronze plating, the ship travelled by air for a few hundred miles. Percy hoped the ancient lands wouldn't be as bad as they'd heard, but it was almost like a commercial. You'll notice the difference immediately. Several times an hour, something attacked the ship. A flock of flesh-eating, stymphalian birds swooped out of the night sky, and Festus torched them. Storm spirits swirled around the mast, and Jason blasted them with lightning. While Coach Hedge was having dinner on the foredeck, a wild Pegasus appeared from nowhere, stampeded over Coach's enchiladas and flew off again, leaving cheesy hoofprints all across the deck. "What was that for?" the coach demanded. The sight of the Pegasus made Percy wish Blackjack were here. He hadn't seen his friend in days. Tempest and Arion also hadn't shown themselves. Maybe they didn't want to venture into the Mediterranean. If so, Percy couldn't blame them. Finally, around midnight, after the 9th or 10th aerial attack, Jason turned to him. "How about you get some sleep? I'll keep blasting stuff out of the sky as long as I can. Then we can go by sea for a while, and you can take point." Percy wasn't sure that he'd be able to sleep with the boat rocking through the clouds as it was shaken by angry wind spirits, but Jason's idea did make sense. He went below decks and crashed on his bunk. His nightmares, of course, were anything but restful. He dreamed he was in a dark cavern. He could only see a few feet in front of him, but the space must have been vast. Water dripped from somewhere nearby, and the sound echoed off distant walls. The way the air moved made Percy suspect the cave's ceiling was far, far above. He heard heavy footsteps, and the twin giants, Ephialtes and Otis, shuffled out of the gloom. Percy could distinguish them only by their hair. Ephialtes had the green locks braided with silver and gold coins. Otis had the purple ponytail braided with... were those firecrackers? Otherwise they were dressed identically, and their outfits definitely belonged in a nightmare. They wore matching white slacks and gold buccaneer shirts with V-necks that showed way too much chest hair. A dozen sheathed daggers lined their rhinestone belts. Their shoes were open-toed sandals, proving that, yes indeed, they had snakes for feet. The straps wrapped around the serpents' necks. Their heads curled up where the toes should be. The snakes flicked their tongues excitedly and turned their gold eyes in every direction, like dogs looking out of the window of a car. Maybe it had been a long time since they'd had shoes with a view. The giants stood in front of Percy, but they paid him no attention. Instead, they gazed up into the darkness. "We're here," Ephialtes announced. Despite his booming voice, his words dissipated in the cavern, echoing until they sounded small and insignificant. Far above, something answered. "Yes, I can see that. Those outfits are hard to miss." The voice made Percy's stomach drop about 6 inches. It sounded vaguely female, but not at all human. Each word was a garbled hiss in multiple tones, as if a swarm of African killer bees had learned to speak English in unison. It wasn't Gaia. Percy was sure of that. But whatever it was, the twin giants became nervous. They shifted on their snakes and bobbed their heads respectfully. "Of course, your ladyship," Ephialtes said. "We bring news of a—" "Why are you dressed like that?" asked the thing in the dark. She didn't seem to be coming any closer, which was fine with Percy. Ephialtes shot his brother an irritated look. "My brother was supposed to wear something different. Unfortunately—" "You said I was the knife thrower today," Otis protested. "I said I was the knife thrower. You were supposed to be the magician. Forgive me, your ladyship. You don't want to hear us arguing. We came as you requested, to bring you news. The ship is approaching." Her ladyship, whatever she was, made a series of violent hisses, like a tyre being slashed repeatedly. With a shudder, Percy realised she was laughing. "How long?" she asked. "They should land in Rome shortly after daybreak, I think," Ephialtes said. "Of course, they'll have to get past the Golden Boy." He sneered, as if the Golden Boy was not his favourite person. "I hope they arrive safely," her ladyship said. "It would spoil our fun to have them captured too soon. Are your preparations made?" "Yes, your ladyship." Otis stepped forward and the cavern trembled. A crack appeared under Otis's left snake. "Careful you don't," her ladyship snarled. "Do you want to return to Tartarus the hard way?" Otis scrambled back, his face slack with terror. Percy realised that the floor, which looked like solid stone, was more like the glacier he'd walked on in Alaska. In some places solid, in other places not so much. He was glad he weighed nothing in his dreams. "There is little left holding this place together," her ladyship cautioned, "except, of course, my own skill. Centuries of Athena's rage can only be contained so well, and the great Earth Mother churns below us in her sleep. Between those two forces, well, my nest has quite eroded. We must hope this child of Athena proves to be a worthy victim. She may be my last plaything." Ephialtes gulped. He kept his eyes on the crack in the floor. "Soon it will not matter, your ladyship. Gaia will rise, and we will all be rewarded. You will no longer have to guard this place or keep your works hidden." "Perhaps," said the voice in the dark, "but I will miss the sweetness of my revenge. We have worked well together over the centuries, have we not?" The twins bowed. The coins glittered in Ephialtes' hair, and Percy realised with nauseating certainty that some of them were silver drachma, exactly like the one Annabeth had got from her mum. Annabeth had told him that in each generation a few children of Athena were sent on the quest to recover the missing Parthenon statue. None had ever succeeded. "We have worked well together over the centuries." The giant Ephialtes had centuries' worth of coins in his braids, hundreds of trophies. Percy pictured Annabeth standing in this dark place alone. He imagined the giant taking that coin she carried and adding it to his collection. Percy wanted to draw his sword and give the giant a haircut starting at the neck, but he was powerless to act. He could only watch. Your ladyship," Ephialtes said nervously, "I would remind you that Gaia wishes the girl to be taken alive. You can torment her, drive her insane, whatever you wish, of course, but her blood must be spilled on the ancient stones." Her ladyship hissed. "Others could be used for that purpose." "Yes," Ephialtes said, "but this girl is preferred, and the boy, the son of Poseidon. You can see why those two would be most suited for the task." Percy wasn't sure what that meant, but he wanted to crack the floor and send these stupid gold-shirted twins down to oblivion. He'd never let Gaia spill his blood for any task, and there was no way he'd let anyone hurt Annabeth. "We will see," her ladyship grumbled. "Leave me now, tend to your own preparations. You will have your spectacle, and I will work in darkness." The dream dissolved, and Percy woke with a start. Jason was knocking at his open doorway. "We've sat down in the water," he said, looking utterly exhausted. "Your turn." Percy didn't want to, but he woke Annabeth. He figured even Coach Hedge wouldn't mind their talking after curfew if it meant giving her information that might save her life. They stood on deck, alone except for Leo, who was still manning the helm. The guy must have been shattered, but he refused to go to sleep. "I don't want any more Shrimpzilla surprises," he insisted. They'd all tried to convince Leo that the Scolopendra attack hadn't been entirely his fault, but he wouldn't listen. Percy knew how he felt. Not forgiving himself for mistakes was one of Percy's biggest talents. It was about 4 a.m. The weather was miserable. The fog was so thick Percy couldn't see Festus at the end of the prow, and warm drizzle hung in the air like a bead curtain. As they sailed into 20-foot swells, the sea heaving underneath them, Percy could hear poor Hazel down in her cabin, also heaving. Despite all that, Percy was grateful to be back on the water. He preferred it to flying through storm clouds and being attacked by man-eating birds and enchilada-trampling pegasi. He stood with Annabeth at the forward rail while he told her about his dream. Percy wasn't sure how she'd take the news. Her reaction was even more troubling than he anticipated. She didn't seem surprised. She peered into the fog. "Percy, you have to promise me something. Don't tell the others about this dream." "Don't what?" "Annabeth. What you saw was about the mark of Athena," she said. "It won't help the others to know. It'll only make them worry, and it'll make it harder for me to go off on my own." "Annabeth, you can't be serious. That thing in the dark, the big chamber with the crumbling floor." "I know." Her face looked unnaturally pale, and Percy suspected it wasn't just the fog. "But I have to do this alone." Percy swallowed back his anger. He wasn't sure if he was mad at Annabeth or his dream, or the entire Greek-Roman world that had endured and shaped human history for 5,000 years with one goal in mind, to make Percy Jackson's life suck as much as possible. "You know what's in that cavern?" he guessed. "Does it have to do with spiders?" "Yes," she said in a small voice. Then, how can you even... He made himself stop. Once Annabeth had made up her mind, arguing with her wouldn't do any good. He remembered the night 3.5 years ago, when they'd saved Nico and Bianca D'Angelo in Maine. Annabeth had been captured by the Titan Atlas. For a while, Percy wasn't sure if she was alive or dead. He travelled across the country to save her from the Titan. It had been the hardest few days of his life. Not just the monsters and the fighting, but the worry. How could he intentionally let her go now, knowing she was heading into something even more dangerous? Then it dawned on him. The way he had felt back then, for a few days, was probably how Annabeth had felt for the 6 months he had been missing with amnesia. That made him feel guilty, and a little bit selfish, to be standing here arguing with her. She had to go on this quest. The fate of the world might depend on it. But part of him wanted to say, forget the world. He didn't want to be without her. Percy stared into the fog. He couldn't see anything around them, but he had perfect bearings at sea. He knew their exact latitude and longitude. He knew the depth of the ocean and which way the currents were flowing. He knew the ship's speed and could sense no rocks, sandbars or other natural dangers in their path. Still, being blind was unsettling. They hadn't been attacked since they had touched the water, but the sea seemed different. Percy had been in the Atlantic, the Pacific, even the Gulf of Alaska, but this sea felt more ancient and powerful. Percy could sense its layers swirling below him. Every Greek or Roman hero had sailed these waters, from Hercules to Aeneas. Monsters still dwelt in the depths, so deeply wrapped in the mist that they slept most of the time. But Percy could feel them stirring, responding to the celestial bronze hull of a Greek trireme and the presence of demigod blood. They are back, the monsters seemed to say. Finally, fresh blood. We're not far from the Italian coast, Percy said, mostly to break the silence. Maybe 100 nautical miles to the south, to the mouth of the Tiber. Good, Annabeth said. By daybreak, we should... Stop. Percy's skin felt washed with ice. We have to stop. Why? Annabeth asked. Leo, stop! He yelled. Too late. The other boat appeared out of the fog and rammed them head on. In that split second, Percy registered random details. Another trireme. Black sails painted with Gorgon's head. Hulking warriors, not quite human, crowded at the front of the boat in Greek armour, swords and spears ready, and a bronze ram at water level, slamming against the hull of the Argo II. Annabeth and Percy were almost thrown overboard. Festus blew fire, sending a dozen very surprised warriors screaming and diving into the sea. But more swarmed aboard the Argo II, grappling lines wrapped around the rails and the mast, digging iron claws into the hull's planks. By the time Percy had recovered his wits, the enemy was everywhere. He couldn't see well through the fog and the dark, but the invaders seemed to be human-like dolphins or dolphin-like humans. Some had grey snouts, others held their swords in stunted flippers. Some waddled on legs partially fused together, while others had flippers for feet, which reminded Percy of clown shoes. Leo sounded the alarm bell. He made a dash for the nearest ballista, but went down under a pile of chattering dolphin warriors. Annabeth and Percy stood back to back, as they'd done many times before, their weapons drawn. Percy tried to summon the waves, hoping he could push the ships apart or even capsize the enemy vessel, but nothing happened. It almost felt like something was pushing against his will, wresting the sea from his control. He raised Riptide, ready to fight, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Several dozen warriors lowered their spears and made a ring around them, wisely keeping out of striking distance of Percy's sword. The dolphin men opened their snouts and made whistling, popping noises. Percy had never considered just how vicious dolphin teeth looked. He tried to think. Maybe he could break out of the circle and destroy a few invaders, but not without the others skewering him and Annabeth. At least the warriors didn't seem interested in killing them immediately. They kept Percy and Annabeth contained while more of their comrades flooded below decks and secured the hull. Percy could hear them breaking down the cabin doors, scuffling with his friends. Even if the other demigods hadn't been fast asleep, they wouldn't have stood a chance against so many. Leo was dragged across the deck, half conscious and groaning, and dumped on a pile of ropes. Below, the sounds of fighting tapered off. Either the others had been subdued or Percy refused to think about it. On one side of the ring of spears, the dolphin warriors parted to let someone through. He appeared to be fully human, but from the way the dolphins fell back before him, he was clearly the leader. He was dressed in Greek combat armour, sandals, kilt and greaves, a breastplate decorated with elaborate sea monster designs, and everything he wore was gold. Even his sword, a Greek blade like Riptide, was gold instead of bronze. The Golden Boy, Percy thought, remembering his dream. They'll have to get past the Golden Boy. What really made Percy nervous was the guy's helmet. His visor was a full face mask fashioned like a gorgon's head, curved tusks, horrible features pinched into a snarl, and golden snake hair curling around the face. Percy had met gorgons before. The likeness was good. a little too good for his taste. Annabeth turned so she was shoulder to shoulder with Percy. He wanted to put his arm around her protectively, but he doubted she'd appreciate the gesture, and he didn't want to give her, this golden guy, any indication that Annabeth was his girlfriend. No sense giving the enemy more leverage than they already had. "Who are you?" Percy demanded. "What do you want?" The golden warrior chuckled. With a flick of his blade, faster than Percy could follow, he smacked Riptide out of Percy's hand and sent it flying into the sea. He might as well have thrown Percy's lungs into the sea, because suddenly Percy couldn't breathe. He'd never been disarmed so easily. "Hello, brother." The golden warrior's voice was rich and velvety, with an exotic accent, Middle Eastern maybe. That seemed vaguely familiar. "Always happy to rob a fellow son of Poseidon. I am Chrysaor, the golden sword. As for what I want..." He turned his metal mask towards Annabeth. "Well, that's easy. I want everything you have." Chapter 30. Percy. Percy's heart did jumping jacks while Chrysaor walked back and forth, inspecting them like prize cattle. A dozen of his dolphin man warriors stayed in a ring around them, spears levelled at Percy's chest, while dozens more ransacked the ship, banging and crashing around below decks. One carried a box of ambrosia up the stairs, another carried an armful of ballista bolts and a crate of Greek fire. "Careful with that," Annabeth warned. "It'll blow up both our ships." "Ha!" Chrysaor said. "We know all about Greek fire, girl. Don't worry, we've been looting and pillaging ships in the Mare Nostrum for eons." "Your accent sounds familiar," Percy said. "Have we met?" "I haven't had the pleasure." Chrysaor's golden Gorgon mask snarled at him, though it was impossible to tell what his real expression might be underneath. "But I've heard all about you, Percy Jackson. Oh yes, the young man who saved Olympus and his faithful sidekick, Annabeth Chase." "I'm nobody's sidekick," Annabeth growled, "and Percy, his accent sounds familiar because he sounds like his mother. We killed her in New Jersey." Percy frowned. "I'm pretty sure that accent isn't New Jersey. Who's his..." "Oh." It all fell into place. Auntie M's garden gnome emporium, the lair of Medusa. She'd talked with that same accent, at least until Percy had cut off her head. "Medusa is your mum?" he asked. "Dude, that sucks for you." Judging from the sound in Chrysaor's throat, he was now snarling under the mask too. "You are as arrogant as the first Perseus," Chrysaor said. "But yes, Percy Jackson, Poseidon was my father, Medusa was my mother. After Medusa was changed into a monster by that so-called goddess of wisdom." The golden mask turned on Annabeth. "That would be your mother, I believe. Medusa's 2 children were trapped inside her, unable to be born, when the original Perseus cut off Medusa's head." 2 children sprang out, Annabeth remembered. "Pegasus, and you." Percy blinked. "So your brother is a winged horse, but you're also my half-brother, which means all the flying horses in the world are my..." "You know what, let's forget it." He'd learned years ago it was better not to dwell too much on who was related to whom on the godly side of things. After Tyson the Cyclops adopted him as a brother, Percy decided that was about as far as he wanted to extend the family. "But if you're Medusa's kid," he said, "why haven't I ever heard of you?" Chrysaor sighed in exasperation. "When your brother is Pegasus, you get used to being forgotten. Oh look, a winged horse! Does anyone care about me? No." He raised the tip of his blade to Percy's eyes. "But don't underestimate me. My name means the golden sword for a reason." "Imperial gold," Percy guessed. "Ah, enchanted gold, yes, later on. The Romans called it imperial gold. But I was the first to ever wield such a blade. I should have been the most famous hero of all time. Since the legend tellers decided to ignore me, I became a villain instead. I resolved to put my heritage to use. As the son of Medusa, I could inspire terror. As the son of Poseidon, I would rule the seas." "You became a pirate," Annabeth summed up. Chrysaor spread his arms, which was fine with Percy since it got the sword point away from his eyes. "The best pirate," Chrysaor said. "I've sailed these waters for centuries, waylaying any demigods foolish enough to explore the Mare Nostrum. This is my territory now, and all you have is mine." One of the dolphin warriors dragged Coach Hedge up from below. "Let me go, you tuna fish," Hedge bellowed. He tried to kick the warrior, but his hoof clanged off his captor's armour. Judging from the hoof-shaped prints in the dolphin's breastplate and helmet, the coach had already made several attempts. "Ah, a satyr," Chrysaor mused. "A little old and stringy, but Cyclopses will pay well for a morsel like him. Chain him up." "I'm nobody's goat meat," Hedge protested. "Gag him as well," Chrysaor decided. "Why, you gilded little..." Hedge's insult was cut short when the dolphin put a greasy wad of canvas in his mouth. Soon the coach was trussed like a rodeo calf and dumped with the other loot, crates of food, extra weapons, even the magical ice chest from the mess hall. "You can't do this," Annabeth shouted. Creosaur's laughter reverberated inside his gold face mask. Percy wondered if he was horribly disfigured under there, or if his gaze could petrify people the way his mother's could. "I can do anything I want," Creosaur said. "My warriors have been trained to perfection. They are vicious, cutthroat." "Dolphins," Percy noted. Creosaur shrugged. "Yes, so? They had some bad luck a few millennia ago. Kidnapped the wrong person. Some of their crew got turned completely into dolphins. Others went mad, but they survived as hybrid creatures. When I found them under the sea and offered them a new life, they became my loyal crew. They fear nothing." One of the warriors chattered at him nervously. Yes, Creosaur growled. "They find one thing, but it hardly matters. They fear it. He's not here." And an idea began tickling at the base of Percy's skull. Before he could pursue it, more dolphin warriors climbed the stairs, hauling up the rest of his friends. Jason was unconscious. Judging from the new bruises on his face, he'd tried to fight. Hazel and Piper were bound hand and foot. Piper had a gag in her mouth, so apparently the dolphins had discovered she could charm speak. Frank was the only one missing, though 2 of the dolphins had bee stings covering their faces. Could Frank actually turn into a swarm of bees? Percy hoped so. If he was free aboard the ship somewhere, that could be an advantage, assuming Percy could figure out how to communicate with him. "Excellent!" Creosaur gloated. He directed his warriors to dump Jason by the crossbows. Then he examined the girls like they were Christmas presents, which made Percy grit his teeth. "The boy is no use to me," Creosaur said, "but we have an understanding with the witch Circe. She will buy the women, either as slaves or trainees depending on their skill. But not you, lovely Annabeth." Annabeth recoiled. "You are not taking me anywhere." Percy's hand crept to his pocket. His pen had appeared back in his jeans. He only needed a moment's distraction to draw his sword. Maybe, if he could take down Creosaur quickly, his crew would panic. He wished he knew something about Creosaur's weaknesses. Usually Annabeth provided him with information like that, but apparently Creosaur didn't have any legends, so they were both in the dark. The Golden Warrior tutted. "Oh, sadly, Annabeth, you will not be staying with me. I would love that, but you and your friend Percy are spoken for. A certain goddess is paying a high bounty for your capture, alive if possible, though she didn't say you had to be unharmed." At that moment, Piper caused the disturbance they needed. She wailed so loudly it could be heard through her gag. Then she fainted against the nearest guard, knocking him over. Hazel got the idea and crumpled to the deck, kicking her legs and thrashing like she was having a fit. Percy drew Riptide and lashed out. The blade should have gone straight through Creosaur's neck, but the Golden Warrior was unbelievably fast. He dodged and parried as the Dolphin Warriors backed up, guarding the other captives while giving their captain room to battle. They chattered and squeaked, egging him on, and Percy got the sinking suspicion the crew was used to this sort of entertainment. They didn't feel their leader was in any sort of danger. Percy hadn't crossed swords with an opponent like this since he'd battled the war god Ares. Creosaur was that good. Many of Percy's powers had got stronger over the years, but now, too late, Percy realised that swordplay wasn't one of them. He was rusty, at least against an adversary like Creosaur. They battled back and forth, thrusting and parrying. Without meaning to, Percy heard the voice of Luke Castellan, his first sword-fighting mentor at Camp Half-Blood, throwing out suggestions, but it didn't help. The golden Gorgon mask was too unnerving. The warm fog, the slick deck boards, the chattering of the warriors, none of it helped. And in the corner of his eye, Percy could see one of the dolphin men holding a knife at Annabeth's throat in case she tried something tricky. He feinted and thrust at Creosaur's gut, but Creosaur anticipated the move. He knocked Percy's sword out of his hand again, and once more Riptide flew into the sea. Creosaur laughed easily. He wasn't even winded. He pressed the tip of his golden sword against Percy's sternum. "A good try," said the pirate, "but now you'll be chained and transported to Gaia's minions. They are quite eager to spill your blood and wake the goddess."